You've been lied to about roasting. Think dark roasts are better, stronger, have more caffeine, better quality? Wrong.
For years, these myths have shaped the way that we buy and drink coffee. But today we're going to set the record straight.
I'm Sid Vegas, and in the next few minutes, we're exposing the truth about coffee roasting that big brands don't want you to know. Let's get into it.
Before we talk about coffee myths, let's talk about the process of roasting coffee.
So coffee has to be first dried and then browned, which is roasted before it comes to you in the form of whole beans or is ground and sent to you in the form of coffee grounds. Coffee comes in a fruit called a coffee cherry or a coffee berry picked off of a coffee tree. There are two little beans or seeds pits, cherry pits if you will, inside of each coffee berry. They have to be separated, and then at that point, they're about 11% moisture content, which is way too wet for a good cup of coffee. So they're dried, and then they're browned or roasted before actually becoming what we use in beans to grind and brew coffee.
What exactly is roasting coffee? Is it like roasting peanuts or roasting chestnuts, like the Christmas song?
Well, it's not quite like roasting chestnuts over an open fire, but there is fire and heat involved. Once your coffee beans are dried, then they're roasted, which is exposing them to heat somewhere in the range of 400 to 600 degrees. Some people roast hotter, some people roast cooler, but they're basically three different methods. One is a paddle method, which the beans are put into a pot with a paddle that stirs around and that pot is exposed to heat, and the paddle keeps the beans turning and moving so they all get an equal exposure. Every bean gets an equal exposure to the heat on every side. Other roasting method is a drum where they're pulled into a big drum. Think about your old-fashioned clothes dryer, and they're rolled around and mixed up again to keep them evenly roasted on all sides of the bean. And then there's a fluid roasting method, which basically has the beans immediately exposed to the flame itself with a very thin layer or sheet between the flame and the beans, and so that the heat causes the beans to move and vibrate, and they roast evenly that way.
Can you tell me more about how roasting affects the flavor?
So some coffee is roasted darker or some coffee is roasted lighter, and that really depends on the type of coffee and the flavors that the individual likes. For instance, a darker roasted coffee is going to taste more bitter, and a lighter roasted coffee is not going to have as much bitterness just because you're not tasting the char or the burn on the beans, if you will. A darker coffee is not stronger, and a darker coffee doesn't necessarily have more caffeine. So the color of the coffee in your cup has nothing to do with strength or with the amount of caffeine. It has more to do with flavor and a roast that's blend for the specific variety of beans that you're using. Definitely darker roasted coffee has a stronger, more bitter flavor. It's also a dark roasted coffee is going to tend more towards the chocolate flavor notes versus a lighter roasted coffee is going to be more of the sweeter or fruity flavored notes.
A lot of people assume dark roasts are the strongest coffee and have the most caffeine. What does strong even mean?
This is where we get into the myths. A lot of people think that a darker color coffee beans are stronger coffee or more caffeine, and that's not true. Some people say, oh, lighter colored coffee beans are more caffeine, but no, the color of the liquid in your cup doesn't indicate strength or amount of caffeine, light or dark. Let's just explode all of these myths at once. Dark or light has nothing to do with strength. That's how the coffee was roasted. The strength of the coffee depends on the amount of coffee relative to the amount of water. For instance, This cup of coffee, while looking lighter, is actually much stronger than this cup of coffee, which is looking much darker. A good cup of coffee is going to have a ratio of water to ground coffee of about 17 to 1. So if you've got 2 ounces of water, you're going to need 17 times 2, or 34 ounces of water. 2 ounces of grounds, 34 ounces of water. And you can vary that a little bit, down 15 to 1, or up to 18 or even 20 to 1. But that's coffee strength. A coffee may or may not be light or dark. That depends on the roast. But roast has nothing to do with strength, and caffeine has nothing to do with color. There's the same amount of caffeine in each coffee bean, no matter how light or dark that bean is roasted, and tons of research has proven that.
So caffeine is more about brewing than roasting. Interesting.
That's exactly right. So coffee has caffeine. Each bean has the same amount of caffeine, except for, of course, Arabica has about half the caffeine of Robusta. But when you brew the coffee, if you want to have more caffeine, then you brew it longer and at a hotter temperature. And the brewing process is really technically extraction. You're extracting the caffeine and the flavors from your coffee grounds. And so a finer grind, like a really fine grind that you would use for espresso, is going to have more caffeine because there's more of the bean exposed to the water. And pressure is used, and usually a higher temperature water. So if you want more caffeine in your cup, it's not a lighter or darker roast, it's more coffee relative to water, which will make you a stronger cup, and stronger will have more caffeine, even if it's not darker, even if it's in fact lighter. Or if you want more caffeine in your cup, like you're using a French press or a drip grind, then you expose the water to the grounds for a longer period of time, or at a higher temperature. Or if you want the most caffeine possible, then cold brew your coffee and leave it for 24 or 48 hours with the water exposed to the grounds, and that has more time to extract more caffeine from the grounds.
So let's tell folks how Sid Vegas roasts his coffee.
So at Sid Vegas, we take the different varieties of coffees that we offer, and we roast them in a paddle roaster in extremely small batches, and then do a taste test. We'll roast it light, medium, dark, dark, really dark, and all different levels, and we'll taste those different roasts and get a feel for which one gives that particular variety of coffee the best flavor and exposes the natural flavors that come from the soil and the region and the variety of coffee and the altitude at which it was grown. And then that's the roast we choose for that coffee. And then from there, we roast in small batches using a drum roaster. And our drum roasters hold anywhere from 10 to 15 kilos each. 15 kilos would be about 35 pounds of coffee. So it really is roasted to order in small batches, but the roast level is predetermined by our experimentation, roasting, and tasting.
No matter what coffee or roast you choose, we roast it fresh and we ship it directly to you.
Exactly. So check out the link below and explore the wonderful world and flavors of Sid Vegas coffee. Out of this world good.
And while you're at it, comment, like, subscribe, and share.
And check out this video on the screen now.